You've got to be kidding me, Max mutters under his breath, his voice thick with frustration. Max thought this farmhouse was his fresh start. But the moment he stepped inside, everything changed. Two strangers, living in his home. No permission, no warning. And the worst part? They've been here longer than he ever knew. This is my property. You need to leave. This farmhouse? It's been ours longer than you think. But why are these women here? And what did they know about the house that Max didn't? The truth is darker than he could ever imagine. This isn't just a battle for a house. It's a fight for control, for family secrets, and for revenge. But who's really pulling the strings? If you're just as shocked as Max is, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And tell us where you're watching from. Comment below. Do you think these women are telling the truth? Let's hear your thoughts. Max felt the weight of the silence pressing down on him. His heart pounded in his chest as he stood frozen, his eyes flicking between the two women who had claimed his home as their own. He had been prepared for some small-town obstacles, maybe a disagreement with a neighbor or two. But this was something else entirely. Veronica, the younger of the two, was the first to speak. She leaned back in the old, cracked armchair, her legs stretched out casually in front of her. Her dark eyes glinted with a hint of mischief, and the faintest smile played at the corners of her lips. You know, this house has a way of making you feel welcome, even if you weren't exactly invited. Max's jaw tightened. He could feel his patience slipping, the frustration growing in the pit of his stomach. He wasn't here for games. He had already given up enough. His wife, his peace of mind, and now his future was slipping through his fingers, wrapped in the form of two strangers sitting in the living room of the farmhouse he'd bought to escape everything. Max stepped forward, his boots echoing loudly on the floorboards as he approached the women. The air in the room was thick with tension, but there was something else, something unsettling that he couldn't quite place. Veronica's nonchalance, Linda's cold silence. It was all too strange, too out of place. He had to act, or this whole situation would spiral beyond his control. This is my property, Max said, his voice firm, trying to keep the tremor of disbelief from breaking through. You're trespassing. I'm giving you 5 minutes to pack your things and leave. Veronica didn't move. She just looked up at him, her gaze unwavering, and the slight curl of her lips deepened. There was a quiet arrogance in her demeanor, a silent challenge that he couldn't ignore. She wasn't afraid of him. Not in the least. 5 minutes. That's awfully generous of you. The silence stretched on, and Max found himself at a loss for words. Something didn't feel right. The farmhouse wasn't just abandoned. It felt like a place that had been forgotten for a reason. A place that was meant to stay in the past. And yet, here were these two women, as if they had always belonged here. Max turned to the other woman, Linda, but she remained motionless, her sharp eyes following him like a predator sizing up its prey. Unlike Veronica, she wasn't playing games. She wasn't here to talk. There was an intensity in her gaze that unsettled him even more than Veronica's playful attitude. Linda's presence was quiet, but Max could feel the threat emanating from her like an electric current. He cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice betraying the frustration that had begun to boil beneath the surface. Linda didn't respond. Instead, she stood up, her movements slow and deliberate, like she was deciding whether to even acknowledge him. She was tall, with dark, almost hollow eyes, her features sharp and unreadable. Her silence only made the situation more unbearable. Finally, Veronica spoke again, her voice carrying a note of finality. "You don't know anything about this place, do you? About your family?" "About what's really been happening here all these years?" Max recoiled, his breath catching in his throat. What did she mean by that? How did she know about his family? The house was supposed to be his escape, his chance to leave behind all the painful memories. And now, these women were pulling him right back into it. "This house belongs to more people than you think. We've been waiting for you, Max." The words hung in the air like smoke. Max's heart skipped a beat as his mind raced. Waiting for me? What was she talking about? He didn't know anything about this house or its past beyond the legal paperwork. But the way Veronica said it, There was an eerie finality to her words that made him question everything. Max's eyes darted to the table where a dusty old letter lay. The seal was broken, the edges of the parchment yellowed with age. It wasn't there when he first arrived, but now it was staring at him, a clue to something he didn't yet understand. His gut twisted with unease as he realized that this was more than just two women in his house. It was the beginning of something much darker. Without thinking, Max reached for the letter, his hands shaking. He unfolded it slowly, the words faint and hard to read. But as he scanned the text, the words jumped out at him. "This land is cursed. Your family owes a debt." Max's breath caught in his throat. The room suddenly felt colder, the air thick with the weight of history. Veronica and Linda were watching him closely, their eyes never leaving his face, as if they were waiting for him to fully absorb the truth. Max could feel the walls closing in. This wasn't just a random encounter. This was planned. These women had been here for a reason, and whatever they wanted from him, it was more than just a place to stay. The truth was staring him in the face, but Max couldn't make sense of it yet. The pieces were scattered, half-formed thoughts and images that didn't quite fit together. But one thing was clear. Whatever happened next, Max was no longer in control. The farmhouse had a history, and now it was about to drag him into it. Max closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady himself. But when he opened them, he knew nothing would ever be the same again. Max stood there, the letter trembling in his hand. His mind raced, the words on the page blurring as his thoughts collided. His family owed a debt? What kind of debt was he being dragged into? How could this farmhouse, this place he had bought to escape everything, be part of a deeper, darker story? Veronica watched him closely, a knowing smile curling her lips, as if she knew exactly what was running through his head. Linda, on the other hand, didn't move. Her cold eyes never left him, a quiet but ever-present threat in her gaze. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about you and your money. This house, this land, it's part of something much bigger. Something that's been in your family for years, and now it's yours to deal with." Max could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him. He was standing at the edge of a cliff, and he could feel the ground beneath him cracking. Every instinct told him to walk away, to leave this place and never look back. But something in Veronica's voice, kept him rooted to the spot. The pull of the unknown was stronger than his desire to escape. Max's grip tightened on the letter, but his mind was still clouded. He couldn't process it all at once. This couldn't be happening. He had planned his life meticulously. He'd worked too hard to build his wealth, his future. He couldn't just let some strange women in a cursed farmhouse tear it all down. "I don't know what game you're playing, but this is over. I'll call the authorities if I have to." Veronica's smile only widened, but there was a coldness in her eyes now. Linda, who had remained silent for so long, finally spoke, her voice low and measured. "You think you can just walk away from this, Max? You think that just because you have money, you're immune to what's coming?" The words hit him harder than any physical blow. He didn't have an answer, because deep down, Max knew she was right. There was something bigger than him happening here. Something he couldn't understand yet but was quickly becoming impossible to ignore. Max felt the ground shift beneath him. He turned away from them, his gaze falling on the house, the silent, waiting walls that seemed to close in on him. This place was supposed to be his salvation, but now it felt like a prison. Every corner of the house whispered secrets, and every shadow seemed to hold a hidden truth about his family's past. In that moment, Max realized the truth. This wasn't just about a farmhouse. This was a battle for his future, his sanity, and perhaps his very soul. Max stormed out of the room, his footsteps heavy on the creaky floorboards as he paced the hallway. His mind was a storm of questions, but there were no answers in sight. The letter, the mysterious women, the house, it all felt like too much to bear. He needed time. He needed space to think. He found himself in the kitchen, the silence of the room overwhelming as he ran his hand over the old countertops. The house seemed to breathe around him, the walls whispering things he couldn't understand. Max wanted to tear it all down, to burn the memories of his family's sins and start fresh. But that wasn't going to be possible now. No amount of money could buy him freedom from what was happening here. Max sat down at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. He had built his empire from nothing, climbed to the top, and thought he had everything figured out. But now, it felt like the world he'd carefully constructed was falling apart. He could hear the faint sound of footsteps behind him, and before he could turn, Ethan's voice broke through his thoughts. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Max looked up, startled. Ethan stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable but knowing. His older brother's eyes were sharp, calculating, just like always. But there was something different about him now, something that felt more dangerous than usual. Ethan had seen combat. He had seen the darkness of the world in a way Max never had. Max tried to speak, but his throat was tight. It was hard to explain everything that had just happened, how everything in his life was starting to feel like a dream he couldn't wake up from. Ethan took a step into the room, his boots making a soft thud on the wooden floor. He studied Max carefully, as if reading every thought. After a long pause, Ethan sat down across from him, folding his arms across his chest. "Tell me everything. What's going on here?" Max could see the concern in his brother's eyes, but it wasn't enough to calm the storm inside of him. His hands were shaking as he passed the letter to Ethan, watching his brother's eyes flick over the words. "This isn't just a house, Max. There's something else going on here. Something your family's been hiding for years." Max's stomach twisted at the words, but he already knew the truth. This house was more than just wood and brick. It was a key to something much larger, something tied to his family's darkest secrets. But the question was, what was it that they were really after? As the day wore on, Max and Ethan scoured the house, searching for answers. The farmhouse seemed to fight them at every turn. Each room held remnants of the past, and every corner seemed to whisper the same warning. This is not what it seems. In the back room, they found an old map tucked inside a drawer. It was drawn in the same old ink as the letter, with strange markings circling certain locations on the property. One of the marks was on the farthest corner of the land, deep in the woods, far from the farmhouse itself. Ethan studied it carefully. Whatever this is, it's buried out there. Max stared at the map, his heart pounding in his chest. The truth was closer than ever, but it was just out of reach, and something told him that once they found it, there would be no going back. Max stared at the map, his pulse quickening. The markings, simple yet deliberate, seemed to hold a key to everything. He had no idea what lay at that far corner of the property, deep in the woods. But as the weight of the map pressed against his fingertips, he could feel the looming threat of discovery. Whatever was hidden out there, it was something his family had desperately tried to bury. Ethan watched him closely, his expression unreadable. For once, Max could see the wariness in his brother's eyes. This wasn't just some petty squatter issue. It wasn't even just about the farmhouse anymore. This was bigger, darker, more sinister than either of them could have imagined. "Max, you need to understand something. Whoever these women are, they're not just after a place to stay. This map, this house, it's part of something bigger. You're walking into a trap, and I don't know if you're ready for what we're about to find." Max's heart raced as he turned the map over, tracing the jagged lines with his finger. He had come to the farmhouse to escape his past, but now it seemed that his past was catching up to him with a vengeance. The house wasn't a new beginning. It was a ticking time bomb, and the fuse was getting shorter with every passing minute. The door creaked open, snapping both brothers out of their thoughts. Veronica and Linda stepped into the room, their presence heavy like a storm cloud. "You're looking at the map now, huh? You should know, it's not going to make things any clearer. You'll never be able to outrun what's coming, Max. You can try to fix the house, sell it, but whatever's buried here is already in your blood." Max felt a chill run through him. He had heard enough. This wasn't about land disputes or ownership. It was about legacy. Something twisted and unspoken, buried in the house's foundation. And now it was coming back to haunt him. The question was, what would it take to survive it? The tension between the two sides was palpable, but neither Max nor Ethan had any intentions of backing down. The women had their own secrets, their own agenda, and it wasn't just about squatting in his house. Max could feel it in his gut. This was personal. This was a fight for something far bigger than a piece of land. Max stood up abruptly, the map still clenched in his hand. He wasn't going to let them control this anymore. If they wanted a battle, he was ready. But as he looked at his brother, he saw the hesitation in Ethan's eyes, a look that said even he wasn't sure what the consequences of this confrontation would be. Get out. You've said your piece. You've had your fun. But I'm taking control of this now. Veronica didn't flinch, but Linda stepped forward, her cold demeanor unfaltering. She locked eyes with Max, and for a moment, the world outside the farmhouse seemed to disappear. It was just the two of them, locked in a silent battle of wills, neither side giving an inch. You can't take control of something you don't understand. This house, these woods, they belong to us. Your family owes a debt, Max, and you're the one who's going to pay it. Max's heart hammered in his chest as Linda's words sank in. A debt? What debt? His father had never spoken of anything like this, and neither had his grandfather. The idea that there was some lingering, unspoken obligation was terrifying, especially when it came from someone as formidable as Linda. The weight of her words hung in the air like smoke, choking the room. Max's mind raced as the reality of the situation began to set in. He had come to this farmhouse for peace, for clarity. But now it felt like he was standing at the edge of a precipice. Every step forward felt like a step into a deeper, darker abyss. And the worst part? He wasn't sure who was on his side anymore. Veronica's eyes sparkled with something darker now. She wasn't just the charming woman who had greeted him with a smile. She was a puppet master, pulling strings that Max couldn't even see. And Linda, Max still couldn't figure her out. She was as silent as a shadow, but her presence was the most dangerous of all. You can try to resist all you want, Max, but the truth is, the more you fight, the more you'll lose. Max's fists clenched at his sides. He wasn't about to give up without a fight. This farmhouse might have its secrets, but it wasn't going to take him down without a fight. He wasn't the same man who had walked into this place weeks ago, full of hope. He was someone else now, someone willing to do whatever it took to get to the truth. Max turned to Ethan, who had been silently observing, weighing the situation. The time for talk was over. We're going out there, tonight. Ethan raised an eyebrow but said nothing. There was no need for further explanation. They were both in this now, and whatever they were going to uncover out in the woods, it was something neither of them could walk away from. That night, the farmhouse felt colder than it ever had before. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the land. Max and Ethan stood at the edge of the woods, the map leading the way. Every step they took felt heavier than the last, as though the very ground beneath them was resisting their presence. But they had no choice. The secrets were out there, buried in the earth, and Max was determined to uncover them, whatever the cost. Max and Ethan stood at the edge of the woods, the tall trees casting long shadows under the pale light of the moon. The air was thick with a strange stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Max could feel the hairs on the back of his neck prickle with unease, the familiar feeling of being watched creeping up his spine. Ethan broke the silence, his voice low, steady, always the calm one in a storm. You sure about this, Max? I know you're desperate for answers, but there's no going back once we step into those woods. Max didn't hesitate. He had spent his life building a future, securing his place in the world, but now it felt like everything was slipping through his fingers. What was left to hold on to if not the truth? And if it was hidden in those woods, he had no choice but to go after it. I didn't come all this way to turn back now. We need to know what's out there. Ethan gave a small nod, his face unreadable as they both turned toward the dense trees ahead. The map, old and worn, had led them this far, and Max wasn't about to let it be a dead end. Each step they took into the woods felt like a descent into the unknown. The air grew colder as they walked deeper, the sounds of the farmhouse growing fainter with every step. Max's thoughts drifted back to the mysterious letter, the cryptic words still echoing in his mind. Your family owes a debt. Was this what it had all been leading to? This hidden corner of the property, buried far from the farmhouse, could be the key to unraveling everything. But what would they find? The map pointed to a clearing up ahead. Max's heart beat faster, his steps quickening, until finally, they reached a small patch of land where the trees parted. In the center of the clearing stood a large, weathered stone, its surface covered in moss and grime, making it look like a forgotten relic of a past no one wanted to remember. Max stepped closer, his breath catching in his throat. Something about the stone felt wrong, as if it wasn't just a natural part of the landscape, but something deliberately placed, deliberately hidden. The air around it felt charged, as though the earth itself was holding a secret. "This doesn't feel right, Max. Maybe we should head back." Max didn't listen. He was already kneeling before the stone, his fingers brushing the cold, moss-covered surface. There, etched into the stone, was a symbol. The same symbol they'd found in the locked room at the farmhouse. It's the same symbol. Ethan crouched beside him, his eyes narrowing as he examined the stone. There was no mistaking it now. This was more than just a family secret. This was a legacy, a story buried deep in the history of Max's bloodline. But why had it been hidden? What did it mean? Max felt a sudden urge to dig beneath the stone, his fingers scraping at the dirt. The soil was soft, freshly disturbed. Someone had been here before. His pulse quickened as he realized they were not the first ones to search for answers. "Help me with this." Together they pulled at the earth, digging with growing desperation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Max's fingers hit something hard, something metallic. A hidden compartment? His heart raced as he cleared away the dirt to reveal a rusty old box, its surface covered in grime, but the lock still intact. The box was heavier than Max expected, its weight almost symbolic of the burden it carried. With trembling hands, he undid the rusty lock and slowly lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of old papers, brittle with age, yellowed at the edges. Max pulled them out, his breath catching in his throat as he saw the first line of the document. The handwriting was elegant, looping in a way that seemed out of place for something so old. The first words read, "The debt shall be repaid with blood." "This is insane, Max. What is this?" Max's mind was racing. What was this debt? What had his family gotten involved in? As he flipped through the pages, the truth began to unravel. A story of betrayal, bloodshed, and a pact made long ago. His family wasn't just involved in land disputes or business deals. They had been tied to something darker, something much more dangerous. The final page of the box contained a map, much like the one they had used to find the stone. But this map was different. It wasn't just of the farmhouse grounds. It was a map of the entire region, with specific locations marked in red. And one of those locations was the very place they were standing. The realization hit Max like a punch to the gut. The house, the women, the symbols, it was all connected. The farm, the land, the bloodline. This debt had been owed for generations, and now Max was caught in the middle of it. He wasn't just here by chance. His family had been preparing him for this, whether he knew it or not. "We've been paying this debt all along, and now it's time to collect." But who was collecting? And what did they want from him? The answers were just beginning to take shape, but with every new revelation, the weight of the situation grew heavier. Max knew one thing for sure. The women weren't just here to stay. They were part of something much bigger, and he had no idea just how deep this rabbit hole went. Max and Ethan stood there for a moment, the wind rustling through the trees. The only sound between them, the creaking of the old farmhouse far in the distance. The stone, the box, the papers, they were just the beginning. The real question now was, what would happen when the truth finally came to light? The night air felt thick, like the weight of secrets that had been buried far too long. Max and Ethan stood in the clearing, staring at the box's contents. The map, the old papers, the chilling reminder that they weren't just exploring a farmhouse. They were digging into a dangerous history, one that connected Max's family to something much darker than he could have imagined. Max's mind raced as he replayed every conversation, every strange look from Veronica and Linda. There was no denying it anymore. The women weren't just squatters. They were players in a game far older and more sinister. But what were they after? Why had they targeted him? "Max, We need to go back. This isn't just about the house anymore. This is bigger than us. Ethan's voice was steady, but Max could hear the underlying concern. His brother was no stranger to danger. But this was different. This wasn't a fight against an enemy they could see. This was something ancient, something tangled in family bloodlines and secrets that stretched back generations. Max stood still for a moment, the weight of the map pressing into his hands. He had come here seeking peace, seeking a fresh start. But now, it felt as though the past was hunting him down, pulling him into a web of lies and betrayal he couldn't escape. We're not leaving yet. We need to understand this, Ethan. Whatever it is, I have to know. They can't control me. Not like this. Ethan hesitated but nodded, the sharpness in his eyes suggesting he understood the gravity of the situation better than Max could even begin to comprehend. The brothers made their way back to the farmhouse, the air growing colder as they approached the house. The windows, once welcoming, now seemed to leer at them, empty, hollow, as if the house itself was aware of the danger that had just been uncovered. Max's footsteps were heavy on the porch, the creaky floorboards under his feet echoing like the slow ticking of a clock, counting down to an unknown conclusion. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Veronica and Linda were waiting for them, their expressions unreadable as they sat in the dimly lit living room. The fire in the hearth flickered weakly, casting long shadows across their faces. "So, did you find what you were looking for?" Max clenched his jaw, the fire inside him building. Veronica's calm demeanor only made it worse. She knew something he didn't, and it was beginning to drive him mad. The constant games, the hidden truths, it was all too much. But now, he had no choice. He had to confront her. "I found more than you realize, and I'm not leaving until I get the full truth." Veronica's smile widened, but there was something more sinister in her eyes now. Linda remained silent, her cold gaze fixed on Max as if she were studying him, waiting for him to crack. "You think you're in control, Max, but you're not. You never were. This house, these woods, they're part of something that's been in your bloodline for generations. You can't just walk away from that." Max's heart skipped a beat. Bloodline. She had said it again, the word that seemed to hold the key to everything. His family's history was more than just wealth and property. It was tied to this place, this land, and the debt that had been buried so deeply that Max had never even suspected it. Ethan, sensing the rising tension, stepped forward, his hand resting on Max's shoulder. He had always been the protector, the one who stood firm when the world tried to push them down. But even he couldn't mask the concern in his eyes. "What is it you want from us? What are you really after?" Veronica's smile faltered for just a moment, her eyes flashing with something sharp and calculating. Then, without warning, she stood up, walking toward the window as if she were contemplating her next move. "What we want is simple, Max. We want what's ours, what your family stole." The words hit Max like a slap. Stole? His family? He had never known any of this. The shock was enough to knock the wind out of him. His father had been a hard man, but he was no criminal. Or was he? Had Max's entire life been a lie? He looked at Ethan, but his brother's face had gone pale. Even he didn't have the answers. The room was suffocating now, the air thick with the weight of everything that had just been revealed. "This house was never meant to be yours, Max. Your family took it from mine, and we've been waiting a long time to get it back." Max could feel the floor beneath him shift, as if the very foundation of his world was crumbling away. The farmhouse, the land, the women. They weren't just part of some inheritance dispute. This was a battle over power, over blood, and the cost of losing would be more than just a house. It would be his family's legacy, and maybe even his own soul. Max's mind was racing, trying to piece together everything that had been said. But one thing was becoming painfully clear. Veronica and Linda weren't just here for revenge. They were here to finish what had been started generations ago. And now, Max was right in the middle of it. He looked back at the map they had uncovered earlier, the markings leading to the stone, the box, and now this, the debt his family owed. It was no longer just a story from the past. It was his present, And unless he figured out how to fight back, it would soon be his future too. Max's fists clenched, but his voice was steady as he addressed Veronica and Linda, his words laced with a determination that surprised even him. You think you can just take everything from me? Think again. I won't let you destroy my life over something that happened before I was even born. Veronica's eyes glinted, and for a brief moment, Max thought he saw something flicker in her expression. A flash of respect, maybe, or perhaps something more dangerous. You'll learn soon enough, Max. The past doesn't just stay buried. It always comes back. Max took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. The air felt electric, charged with an intensity that made everything feel larger than life. The women were right. There was no walking away from this. There was no running from the past, no escaping the family legacy that had now fallen on his shoulders. The question now wasn't if he could survive this. The question was, would he be able to reclaim everything before it was too late? Max could feel the ground beneath him shifting, the reality of his situation sinking in deeper with each passing moment. Veronica and Linda weren't just two random women. They were the key to something far darker, far older than Max ever realized. The house, the land, his family's legacy, it was all tied together in a knot of secrets, lies, and debts that Max had never even known existed. Max clenched his fists, his mind racing. He had lived his life thinking that his family's wealth was built on hard work, on success. But now it seemed like it was built on something else entirely. Corruption, deceit, maybe even bloodshed. It was a legacy he wasn't sure he wanted to inherit. My family didn't steal anything. They worked for everything they had. You're telling me this is all some kind of punishment? Veronica stood there, watching him with a look that said she wasn't surprised by his reaction. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't even angry. She was just waiting for him to catch up to the truth. Linda, on the other hand, remained stone-faced, her expression unreadable. Punishment? No, Max. It's justice. You're the one who's been living a lie, thinking you had a clean slate. But the truth always comes out. Your family took what wasn't theirs, and now you're going to pay the price. Max's head spun. He didn't know what was worse, the anger he felt for the women or the doubt creeping into his thoughts about his own family. Could his grandfather have been involved in something like this? Max had heard whispers about his family's past, but he'd always dismissed them as just that. Whispers, rumors. But now, with Veronica and Linda standing in front of him, everything he thought he knew about his legacy was unraveling. He turned toward Ethan, who had been silent for too long. His brother's gaze was distant, focused on something beyond the women, beyond the room. Max could see the concern in his eyes, the same concern he'd seen when they first arrived at the farmhouse. Ethan knew there was more to this story, but he wasn't ready to share it with Max yet. Ethan, tell me the truth. What's going on? What aren't you telling me? Ethan hesitated, his gaze flicking briefly to Linda before returning to Max. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. It was clear he didn't want to share whatever information he had, at least not yet. Max felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. What had his brother known? You don't want to hear it, Max. Not now. Max's frustration flared, but he held back. Ethan wasn't ready to spill everything, but Max wasn't a fool. He knew that whatever secrets his brother was holding were just as dangerous as the ones the women were hiding. And if he was going to make it out of this with his sanity intact, he needed to uncover everything, no matter how dark or painful it might be. The tension in the room thickened, the silence becoming almost suffocating. Veronica's eyes gleamed with anticipation, like she was waiting for Max to finally break. But Max wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. He was done with the games. He had come here to find answers, and he wasn't going to stop until he had them. Enough. I want to know everything. Where do we start? Veronica's smile widened, her eyes cold. She seemed almost pleased by Max's determination, as if she had expected him to reach this point eventually. She took a slow step forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. We start with your father. Your family's debt began long before you ever knew this place existed. But it's here now, Max. It's in your blood, in the very walls of this farmhouse. The land doesn't forgive, and neither do we. Max's mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. His father's past, his family's involvement in something dark and dangerous. It was all part of the story that had led him to this moment. But why hadn't his father ever told him? Why had he hidden all of this from Max, left him to walk into a situation he couldn't understand? Max's eyes shifted to Linda, whose stoic silence had been unnerving, almost as if she were waiting for him to crack. But when she finally spoke, it was in a voice so quiet, so controlled, it sent a chill down Max's spine. There's a reason your father left this place, a reason your family abandoned it all, and now you're here to pick up the pieces. Max's throat tightened. The truth was slipping through his fingers, but every time he thought he understood it, it slipped further away. He had no choice now but to follow the trail of his family's mistakes, hoping it would lead him to answers before it was too late. Max turned away from the women, his gaze landing on the fireplace. He felt like the walls were closing in on him, the house itself pressing down, forcing him to confront things he was never prepared to face. His family's past was coming to light, but what did that mean for his future? The answers were out there, somewhere, hidden in the dark corners of the farmhouse, waiting to be uncovered. Max knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let it go. He couldn't walk away from the house, from the truth. Not now. We'll find out what's really going on here, and when we do, you won't be able to hide anymore. Veronica's eyes darkened, and Linda's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. They both knew something Max didn't. But Max wasn't about to let them control the narrative any longer. He would get to the bottom of it, no matter the cost. The game was on, and this time, Max was playing to win. As Max left the room, his mind set on uncovering the truth. He couldn't shake the feeling that the farmhouse wasn't just a home. It was a prison. And the more he uncovered, the more trapped he felt in his family's web of lies and debts. He wasn't just fighting for the house anymore. He was fighting for his own freedom. And as the night stretched on, Max realized that what lay ahead of him was far darker than he had ever imagined. The next morning came with a quiet intensity that Max couldn't shake. The house seemed to echo with a silent anticipation, as though it too was waiting for something. Max couldn't decide if it was the ghosts of his family's past or the looming presence of Veronica and Linda that made the air feel so thick. Either way, he couldn't ignore the reality settling in. His life was no longer his own. Max paced through the living room, the worn floors creaking beneath him, his mind spinning with the revelations from the night before. The debt, the lies, the secrets. It was all too much. He had come to this farmhouse to escape, but now, he was buried deeper than ever in the mess his family had left behind. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a knock at the door. Max tensed, expecting another confrontation, another twist in this ever-unfolding nightmare. When he opened the door, it wasn't Veronica or Linda. It was a local sheriff, a man in his mid-40s, dressed in a worn uniform. His name was Sheriff Daniels, and he had a grim look on his face, as if he'd been carrying bad news for a long time. "Morning, Mr. Reynolds. Thought I'd stop by. We got a report of some strange activity in the woods. People have been talking, and I figured it was better to come directly to you." Max's stomach turned. The women had been right. Word was getting out, and the walls were starting to close in. The sheriff was here because the whole town knew something was going on. Max had already figured out that the women weren't just here to squat. But what else was there to this story? Max glanced back toward the house, where the silence felt louder than ever. Everything was beginning to feel like a trap, and Sheriff Daniels was just another piece of the puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. "What kind of activity, Sheriff?" Sheriff Daniels hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the farmhouse as if measuring the weight of his words. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost as if he didn't want to be overheard. "Well, there's been talk. A few folks saw someone, or something, moving around the old stone circle near the edge of your property. It's been abandoned for years, but people are getting nervous. I thought you should know." Max's heart skipped a beat. The stone circle. The very place they had uncovered last night. It had to be connected to everything. Max felt it in his bones. But the sheriff didn't seem to realize the depth of what was really going on here. He was just another person caught up in the local folklore and superstition. "I'll look into it, Sheriff. But if you're worried, why come to me? I've only just bought the place." The sheriff gave him a long, searching look before speaking again, his voice quieter this time. "Look, Max, people in town are on edge. There's been talk about your family, about the land, about things no one wants to say out loud. Be careful, all right? Sometimes, it's better to let old things stay buried." Max watched as Sheriff Daniels turned and walked away, his boots heavy against the earth. The weight of the sheriff's warning lingered long after the man disappeared down the gravel path. Was it fear, or was it a warning? Max stood at the door for a moment longer, the cool morning air biting at his skin. The farmhouse loomed behind him like a watchful sentinel, waiting for him to make his next move. He could feel it now, the tension building again. Whatever was buried out there in the woods, Max was getting closer to uncovering it. But at what cost? He turned back into the house, his mind still spinning. But before he could go further, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. Veronica's voice floated through the air like a shadow, her presence almost ghostly as she entered the room. She had been standing there, waiting for him to make a move, and now she was here, sliding into the space between him and the truth. "Well, well, the sheriff paid you a visit, I see. Was he helpful, or was he just another messenger, warning you about things you don't understand?" Max didn't answer immediately. His thoughts were still lingering on the sheriff's words, on the unsettling feeling that had settled in the pit of his stomach. But he knew one thing. Veronica wasn't here for casual conversation. She had come with a purpose. "What do you want, Veronica? You've been playing your game long enough. If there's something you're not telling me, just say it." Veronica's expression softened, but her eyes remained sharp, calculating. She wasn't fazed by Max's harsh tone. In fact, she almost seemed pleased by it, like she was enjoying watching him struggle to make sense of it all. "You think I'm playing games? Max, this is bigger than you. This is bigger than both of us. You're in the middle of something that's been brewing for decades, and you have no idea what you're up against." Max's frustration boiled over. The cryptic words, the hints, the warnings. It was all becoming too much. He had spent his entire life controlling every detail of his world, but now he was drowning in a sea of secrets he couldn't escape. "Then tell me everything. What's your plan? What do you want from me?" For a moment, Veronica was silent, her gaze piercing as if she were weighing his words. Then, without warning, she stepped closer to him, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "What I want you to understand. I want you to realize that this is not just about the land. It's not about money or power. This is about the debt your family owes, and if you don't pay it, there will be consequences. You're already in too deep, Max. The question is, how deep are you willing to go?" Max's heart pounded in his chest. Every word Veronica spoke was like a weight, pushing him further into a world he didn't understand but couldn't escape. She was right. He was already too deep, and no matter how hard he fought, there was no walking away now. The room felt colder now, the silence between them stretching as Max struggled to digest what he had just heard. Veronica was no longer just a nuisance. She was a threat. And Linda was a ghost in the background, watching, waiting for Max to make the wrong move. Max had to act, but the next steps weren't clear. The deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became. And the more he learned, the less he was sure about who was really pulling the strings. But one thing was certain. Max wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. He wasn't going to let his family's past dictate his future. He'd fight. But as he looked at Veronica, he realized that the true battle hadn't even begun. The next few days passed in a blur. Max couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in around him. Every corner of the farmhouse seemed to hold new clues. But none of them made the picture clearer. Instead, they only deepened the mystery, tightening the grip around his chest. He spent hours combing through old letters, journals, and boxes hidden in dusty corners of the house. But the more he uncovered, the more he realized he was just scratching the surface. There was a history here, his family's history, that was darker than he could have ever imagined. It was late one evening when Max stumbled upon a worn, leather-bound journal hidden in the attic, tucked behind some old furniture. The journal was thick, its pages yellowed with age, but as soon as he opened it, he knew he'd found something important. This wasn't just another piece of family history. This was a record, a confession of sorts, from someone who had been deeply involved in the secrets he was trying to uncover. The first entry was dated decades ago, written by his grandfather, the man who had built the foundation of Max's wealth and family legacy. The words were sharp, clear, and unambiguous. It was a letter to someone named James, Max's father. Max's eyes skimmed the pages, his breath catching in his throat. The journal detailed the struggles of his grandfather and a series of deals that had taken place under the cover of secrecy. There were mentions of betrayals, blood oaths, and a debt that was never fully repaid. But what struck Max the hardest was a chilling passage about a final payment that had to be made. And it wasn't just money. It was something much more personal. His grandfather had promised something to someone, and Max's family was now on the verge of fulfilling that promise. As Max read further, he could feel the room closing in on him, his pulse quickening. The words were clear. The debt wasn't just financial, it was a blood debt. The house, the land, the farmhouse itself. It was part of an unspoken deal between his family and the women who were now living there. It was like a knot tightening around his throat, one he couldn't undo. His family had made a pact long ago. And now, the women who had entered his life weren't just there by accident. They were fulfilling a role they had been born into, a role that tied them to his family in ways Max couldn't yet fully understand. Max slammed the journal shut, his hands shaking. This wasn't just about his family's past mistakes anymore. It wasn't just about the farmhouse, the women, or even the debt. This was something more, something that connected them all. Pulling them deeper into a game that none of them could ever escape, Max needed answers. And there was only one place left to go. The stone circle in the woods. The place where everything began. He couldn't ignore it any longer. The answers were buried there, and he would have to face whatever waited for him there. Max wasn't the type to back down. But as he stood at the edge of the woods, looking toward the stone circle in the distance, he felt something shift inside him. This wasn't a fight he could win alone. The more he learned, the more he realized he was in over his head. The past wasn't just a story, it was a trap, and he had fallen right into it. Ethan had been quiet for the last few days, retreating into his own thoughts. But now, Max turned to him, desperate for his brother's advice, his strength. "We need to go back to the circle. Ethan, everything we've uncovered, it's all connected, and I don't think I can do this alone." Ethan's face was grim, his jaw clenched. He had seen Max struggle with the weight of this family secret, but now it was clear that whatever lay ahead was something neither of them could have prepared for. Ethan nodded silently, his hand resting on Max's shoulder, a silent show of support. The two brothers made their way into the woods once again, the map in Max's hands and a sense of dread building in his chest. The air seemed to thicken around them as they approached the stone circle. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though the very earth beneath them was trying to pull them deeper into its secrets. When they reached the circle, Max felt a strange unease. It was as if the stones themselves were watching them. There was no escaping the feeling that they had crossed some invisible line. The house, the land, it was all watching, waiting for the final pieces to fall into place. "Whatever we're about to find, it's bigger than us, Max. We need to be ready." Max nodded, his grip tightening on the map. He had no idea what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back now. They approached the center of the stone circle, the earth soft beneath their feet. Max knelt down and ran his fingers over the stones, feeling the cold, ancient surface. His thoughts raced as he remembered the journal's mention of a final payment. Was it possible? Was this what it had all been building up to? As Max traced the markings on the stones, his breath hitched. The symbol from the farmhouse, etched into the stone. Just as he had seen it inside the locked room, it was here, waiting for him. "It's here, Ethan, the same symbol, just like in the house." Ethan stepped forward, his eyes scanning the area. But it wasn't just the stones that caught his attention. It was the ground beneath them. Something was different about it, something that didn't feel right. "Look here." Max followed Ethan's gaze and saw it, A small, barely visible crack in the earth, like something had been buried there for a long time. Without thinking, Max moved toward it, pulling at the dirt with his hands. It was hard work, but after a few moments, his fingers hit something solid. Max dug with renewed urgency, the world around him growing darker with every shovelful of dirt that came away. He didn't know what he was expecting, but it wasn't long before he uncovered an old, rusted chest. It was small, inconspicuous, but as he lifted the lid, his breath caught in his throat. Inside was a bundle of old papers, wrapped tightly in a faded cloth. Max's hands shook as he unwrapped them, revealing the first page, an old contract, written in an elegant but unfamiliar script. Max's eyes scanned the document, his heart racing as the words began to make sense. It was a binding contract. His family had signed away more than just land. They had made a pact, one that tied them to something far older than money, far older than any debt they could have imagined. What is this? What have they done? The truth was beginning to take shape, but it was too much to comprehend all at once. The weight of the past was closing in, and Max could feel the walls of the farmhouse, the stone circle, and everything in between closing in on him. There was no escaping the debt now, and there was no way out of the deal that had been struck so long ago. The question was, would Max pay the price, or would he fight to free himself and his family from the curse that had haunted them for generations? The chest felt heavier in Max's hands than it had any right to. It was old, ancient even, and as he held it, he could feel the weight of its secrets pressing down on him. He had expected to find answers, but what he had uncovered was more than he could have imagined. A binding contract, written in elegant, meticulous handwriting, detailing promises and debts that went back generations. Max stood there, staring at the chest, his mind spinning. He hadn't come here for this. He had come for answers about the farmhouse, about the strange women who had intruded on his new life. But now, it was clear. This wasn't just about the house. This was about his family, his bloodline, and something far darker than he had ever imagined. Ethan stood beside him, his face grim as he read over Max's shoulder. Ethan had always been the protector, the one who knew how to handle pressure. But even he seemed shaken by what they had found. He turned to Max, his voice low but urgent. "We need to go back to the farmhouse. Whatever this contract is, it's not just a piece of paper. It's a promise, Max. A promise that has bound your family for generations. And if this is what I think it is..." Ethan didn't finish the sentence, but Max didn't need him to. He already knew. Whatever this contract was, it wasn't just a piece of their family's history. It was the key to everything that had happened to him, to them, to the women in the farmhouse. Max carefully folded the contract, tucking it back into the chest, and stood up. The weight of the discovery was overwhelming. His whole life had been a lie, built on secrets and debts he hadn't known about. But now, there was no turning back. He needed to confront Veronica and Linda, to force them to tell him everything. The two brothers made their way back to the farmhouse in silence, the weight of the world pressing down on them with every step. The night had fallen, the moon casting long shadows across the land as they approached the house. Max could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the tension in the air thicker than it had ever been. As they stepped inside, Max's eyes immediately locked onto Veronica and Linda. They were waiting for him, just as they always had been. Their presence was suffocating, filling the room with a quiet, unnerving power. Veronica stood by the fireplace, her back to him, her hands casually resting on the mantel. Linda sat at the table, her eyes trained on Max, unwavering. Max's breath caught in his throat as he stepped closer. He could feel the weight of the contract in his pocket, the truth that was about to be revealed. It was time to end the silence. It was time to confront them. "I know what you're after. I know what you've been hiding. And it ends tonight." Veronica didn't turn around, but there was a glint of satisfaction in her eyes as she spoke. "You think this is just about the house, don't you? About the land, about the money. But it's never been about that. It's about something far older, far darker than anything your family has ever told you." Max's fists clenched at his sides. His family's dark history was unfolding in front of him, piece by piece, and he still couldn't grasp it all. But one thing was clear. Veronica was enjoying this. She was enjoying the chaos she had caused. the unraveling of everything Max thought he knew about his life. Linda finally spoke, her voice low and deadly. "You've always been so blind, Max. Your father, your grandfather, they made deals with forces you don't understand. They gave up everything for power. And now, it's time for you to pay the price." Max felt a cold shiver run down his spine. This wasn't just a family debt. This was something much more dangerous, something that went beyond money, beyond land. It was a curse. A pact that had been made long before Max had ever set foot on the property. And now, he was the one who had to deal with the consequences. "I'm not going to let you win. I'm not going to let my family's sins define me." Veronica finally turned to face him, her smile cold and unfeeling. "You don't have a choice, Max. This is bigger than you, bigger than your family. The debt was paid long ago, but there's a cost, and you're the one who has to settle it." Max stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Veronica's. He wasn't going to let them control him. He wasn't going to let them have the last word. But just as Max opened his mouth to speak, Linda stood up, her eyes cold and steady. "If you think you can walk away from this, you're wrong. The bloodline runs through you, Max. You can try to fight it, but in the end, it will consume you. You'll have no choice but to surrender." Max's mind was racing. He had come here for peace, for a fresh start. But now, it seemed like there was no escaping the past. It was tangled in his blood, in the very land he had bought. The question was, could he ever escape it? The room fell into silence, the tension hanging thick in the air. Max knew this was the moment where everything would change. He couldn't turn back. He couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Max's hand tightened around the contract in his pocket, the symbol from the stone circle burning in his mind. There was a way out, but it would come at a price, and Max wasn't sure he was ready to pay it. Max stood there, feeling the weight of his family's legacy press down on him like an anchor, pulling him deeper into a past he had never asked for. The truth was undeniable now. His family had made a pact with something far darker, something that had come to collect. And he, the unsuspecting heir, was the one who had to face the consequences. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. His pulse raced, his thoughts swirling in a blur. He had always prided himself on being in control, of making rational decisions, of knowing the next move. But here, in this moment, nothing made sense. He was standing at the precipice of a fate he had never imagined, and the weight of it was suffocating. "What is it that you want from me? You've taken everything else. Now what?" Veronica's eyes gleamed with cold satisfaction as she took a slow step toward him, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. She was enjoying this, enjoying watching him squirm under the weight of his family's sins. The thrill of it was almost palpable, like a predator closing in on its prey. "It's simple, really. We want what's owed to us, what your family took from us. You think you can just walk away from this, Max, but you can't. Your father's actions have already set things in motion, and now you have to finish what he started." Max's chest tightened. His father's actions? His father had always been the rock of the family, the man who built everything from the ground up. The thought that his father had been involved in something so sinister made Max's stomach turn. And now, here he was, caught in the aftermath of a deal made long before he was born. But Veronica wasn't done. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "There's a price, Max, and it's a price you'll have to pay. You'll either settle it, or we will. The choice is yours." Max's heart pounded in his chest, the room closing in on him as the gravity of her words sank in. The stone circle, the contract, the bloodline, everything was tied together in a way he hadn't fully grasped until now. It was all part of a larger, ancient game that his family had unwittingly become a part of. And now, it was his turn to play. He wanted to scream, to lash out at Veronica and Linda, to demand that they leave him and his family alone. But there was something in their eyes that told him this wasn't just about the house or the land. This was about power, something far bigger than him, something that had been handed down through the generations, waiting for its moment to strike. Max turned toward Ethan, hoping for some kind of reassurance, but his brother's expression was grim. Ethan had always been the one to keep calm in the face of danger, but even he seemed shaken now. He wasn't just worried about Max's safety, he was worried about what was happening to them both. Max, you don't understand. This isn't just about you. This is about everything your family has done. And if we don't stop this now, it'll consume everything we know. Max's mind raced. He wanted to deny it, to say that he could fix this, that there was still time to walk away and leave the past behind. But the words wouldn't come. The truth was too raw, too real. Veronica and Linda weren't just interested in the farmhouse. They weren't just trying to reclaim property. They were after something much bigger. And Max, whether he liked it or not, was at the center of it all. Max swallowed hard, his fists clenched at his sides. The anger, the fear, the helplessness. It all boiled to the surface, and for a moment, he wanted to lash out. But he knew better. He couldn't let his emotions take control. He had to think. He had to plan. What exactly do you want from me? Tell me what I have to do, and I'll do it. The silence in the room was deafening as Veronica and Linda exchanged a look. Max knew something was coming, but he wasn't prepared for what she said next. We want you to join us. We want you to accept your place in this legacy, in the family's debt. You can fight it if you want, but it won't change anything. It's who you are, Max. Who you were always meant to be. Max's stomach dropped. Join them? He could feel the walls closing in, the sense of being trapped tightening around him. He had spent his life building something he could control, something he could protect. But now, everything was slipping through his fingers, and he was being asked to accept something he couldn't even begin to understand. I won't join you. You won't win. Veronica's smile faltered, but only for a moment. There was something in her expression now, something almost pitying, as if she had already expected Max to resist. She turned to Linda, and for a brief second, they shared a look that sent a chill down Max's spine. I was hoping you'd say that. The air in the room shifted, growing colder, thicker. Max couldn't explain it, but the feeling was overwhelming, like the farmhouse itself was coming alive, responding to the words that had just been spoken. Veronica and Linda weren't just manipulating him. They were guiding him, shaping him, pushing him toward a destiny he didn't want. Ethan stepped forward, his protective instinct kicking in. We don't have to do this. We can walk away, Max. We can figure out another way. But Max knew there was no walking away now. The pieces had already fallen into place. Whatever his family had done in the past, whatever debts they owed, it was all coming down to this moment. And Max had no choice but to face it. He stood up straighter, his resolve hardening. This wasn't just about surviving this night. It was about taking control. He couldn't change the past, but he could change the future. He could stop this cycle before it consumed everything. This isn't over, not by a long shot. Veronica's eyes flickered with something like amusement, but there was a new edge to her expression, something that suggested she was finally seeing Max for who he really was, someone who was willing to fight back. But she didn't look worried, not yet. You'll see, Max. The debt is never paid until it's paid in full. Max turned away, his mind whirling. He didn't know how he was going to fight this battle, or even if he could. But one thing was certain. He wouldn't let them win. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. He wasn't just fighting for his family's past anymore. He was fighting for his future. And whatever it took, he was going to see this through to the end. Max could feel the weight of the women's words echoing in his mind long after they had left the room. The contract, the debt, the stone circle. It was all part of something he was only beginning to understand. Every step he took, every piece of the puzzle he uncovered, led him further down a path he couldn't unwalk. And as much as he tried to ignore it, there was a gnawing feeling that something more dangerous was lurking in the shadows. The next morning, Max couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. He sat in the study, staring at the map he had found, his mind working through the details, trying to piece it all together. The stone circle, the markings, the contract, it all pointed to one place. But what exactly would he find when he got there? And what would he be forced to face? Ethan walked in, his steps heavy but deliberate. He had been quiet for the past day, clearly grappling with the same questions Max had. But now, there was a new edge to his voice, a sense of urgency. Max, I think we need to talk about what happens next. You've got the map, you know where it leads. But I've been thinking, whatever's out there, whatever this debt is, it's not just about us. It's about the town, too. About everyone who's been caught up in this thing for generations. Max turned to face his brother, the same sharp focus in his eyes. Ethan was right. This wasn't just about the farmhouse or the land. It was about something far bigger. The people in the town, the sheriff, even the strangers who had come to call the farmhouse home. They were all part of a larger web Max was only beginning to untangle. Ethan's voice lowered, the tension in his words thick with something Max couldn't ignore. This isn't just a family affair, Max. Whatever's buried out there in the woods, it's been buried for a reason. Your family might be tied to it, but so is this town. So are we. We're going to find out what that reason is, but it's not going to end with us hiding from it. The words hung in the air between them, a promise that neither of them could afford to break. Max had always prided himself on his ability to control situations, to face obstacles head-on. But this wasn't a normal fight. It wasn't something you could just throw money at or solve with a clever business deal. This was bigger, more ancient, and more dangerous than anything he had ever dealt with. Max and Ethan packed their things in silence, the weight of their decision hanging over them. They weren't just going to the stone circle to dig up some old family secret. They were going to face whatever had been waiting for them out there, whatever had been pulling the strings in their family's past and present. The drive was silent, the landscape flashing by in a blur of trees and open fields. The farmhouse, standing stark and silent against the horizon, looked even more foreboding now. It wasn't just a house, it was the heart of everything that had gone wrong, and everything that still had the potential to go wrong. They arrived at the clearing just as dusk was beginning to settle in. The stone circle loomed ahead, the weathered stones casting long, jagged shadows across the ground. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive, as if the very earth was holding its breath. Max's heart pounded in his chest as he and Ethan stepped out of the truck. They both knew that whatever they found here, it would change everything. Max approached the stones with caution, the map clutched tightly in his hand. He studied the markings once more, the lines that had led them to this place. The symbols carved into the stones mirrored the ones from the farmhouse, the ones from the contract, the ones from the stone circle itself. Everything was connected. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him as he traced the symbols with his fingers. The past was alive here, waiting for them to understand it, to make the right choice. As Max's fingers hovered over the symbols, he felt something shift, an almost imperceptible vibration in the ground beneath him. His heart skipped a beat. He glanced at Ethan, who was already watching him, his expression tense. It was as though the earth itself was reacting to their presence. Then, without warning, a low rumble echoed through the clearing. The stones seemed to tremble, and Max's breath caught in his throat. Something was happening, something they weren't prepared for. He didn't know if it was the house, the land, or the bloodline that was making it happen. But whatever it was real. The ground beneath them cracked open, the earth parting to reveal a hidden passageway, a tunnel leading deep beneath the stone circle. Max stared down at it, his mind racing. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. The debt wasn't just metaphorical. It was buried, hidden, waiting for someone to claim it. Max stepped forward, his feet barely touching the ground as he approached the opening. The air was thick with the scent of earth and old stone, the darkness below beckoning him to step into it. Ethan followed closely behind, his eyes scanning the surroundings warily, as if he expected something to jump out at them from the shadows. Max took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. This was it. Whatever had been buried here, whatever dark secret had been hidden for so long, he was going to face it head-on. No more running. With one last glance at his brother, Max stepped into the tunnel, the darkness swallowing him whole. Ethan followed, his hand gripping the flashlight as they descended into the depths of the earth. The air grew colder, the walls narrowing as they moved deeper. It was like stepping into a tomb, a place where time had been forgotten, where secrets had been sealed away, waiting for someone to come and claim them. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, the walls rough and uneven. Max's heart raced as he tried to steady his breathing. What was down there? What had his family hidden for so long? And why had they kept it buried in the first place? But there was no turning back now. They had come this far, and they were going to find out what the debt truly was. And more importantly, how they could stop it from destroying everything they had left. As they reached the end of the tunnel, Max could see the faintest glimmer of light, a faint crack in the stone, barely visible. He and Ethan exchanged a look, silently acknowledging that they were about to uncover something that could change everything. Max stepped forward, pushing aside the last remnants of the earth that had concealed the truth for so long. And as his hand touched the cold stone, a shock ran through his body. The air was electric, thick with anticipation, and with a sudden crack, the final piece of the past was revealed. The air in the tunnel felt colder as Max and Ethan made their way deeper into the earth. The faint crack in the stone led to a larger chamber, a space untouched for centuries. Max's heartbeat echoed in his chest as he strained his eyes to make out the surroundings. The flashlight's beam barely cut through the darkness, but it revealed enough. The chamber was vast, its walls covered in intricate carvings, symbols that Max had seen before. The same symbols from the farmhouse, the same markings on the stones outside. This was it, the heart of the mystery, the epicenter of everything. The stone walls were etched with what appeared to be family histories, accounts of deals made and debts owed. But it wasn't just any history. It was a twisted narrative, one that connected Max's family to something far older, something far more powerful than they had ever imagined. The debts weren't just monetary. They were blood debts, oaths that had been sworn and sealed with more than just promises. Max stepped forward, his pulse quickening. At the center of the chamber lay a stone altar, old and worn, covered in dust and moss. It looked ancient, like something from another time. And on it, there were remnants of something strange, old relics, faded parchments, and a large sealed chest that looked like it had been left untouched for generations. Max's fingers trembled as he approached the altar, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of life, any movement. But the only thing that moved was the air itself, stale and thick with the weight of the past. The chamber was silent, and yet, it felt alive with something more. He reached out, his hand resting on the cold surface of the chest. It was the same size as the one he had found in the farmhouse, the one with the contract. But this felt different. This wasn't just a family heirloom. This was the heart of the debt, the payment that had been promised long ago. Max glanced at Ethan, who was standing just behind him, his face tense, his hand on the flashlight, scanning the chamber for any signs of danger. Ethan's silence spoke volumes. They both knew this wasn't just about finding answers anymore. This was about something far more dangerous, something that could destroy them both. Do you think this is the end of it, Ethan? Do you think we're going to find a way out of this? I don't know. But whatever happens, we're in it together. We've come this far. Max nodded, but inside, he felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The more he uncovered, the more he realized how deep his family's involvement ran. They had been players in a game of power and manipulation, using the very land they stood on as a bargaining chip. And now, Max was caught in the middle of it all, forced to deal with the consequences of their choices. He couldn't let it end like this. He had to stop it, whatever it took. Max turned back to the chest, his fingers tracing the edge of the seal. It was tightly bound, ancient-looking, as if whatever was inside had been kept hidden on purpose. The bloodline, the pact, the debt, it all led here. This was the final piece. This was what he had been searching for. With a deep breath, Max took hold of the chest and pulled. The seal cracked open with a loud, echoing snap. Inside, nestled between layers of old, rotting cloth, was a bundle of papers. The papers were heavy, the ink faded but still legible. Max's fingers shook as he unrolled the first sheet. It was another contract, but this one was different. It wasn't just a debt agreement, it was a binding contract of servitude, a promise of blood that had been sworn to an unknown force. Max's eyes scanned the text, his heart pounding as he read the terms. This contract was the culmination of everything. His family's downfall, the debt, the promises. The payment was more than just land or wealth. It was an offering, a tribute to an ancient power, one that demanded loyalty, blood, and service in exchange for survival. And now, the time had come to settle that debt. Max could feel the walls closing in as he read further. His family had pledged themselves to this unknown force long ago. They had made promises, sworn oaths, and now, Max was the one who had to fulfill them. This wasn't just a family debt. It was a curse. Ethan stepped forward, his expression grim as he read over Max's shoulder. His voice was tight with disbelief as he processed the information. This is bigger than we thought. They didn't just sell out for land or money. They gave their souls. We have to break it. We have to end it. But as Max spoke, the ground beneath them trembled, a low rumble reverberating through the chamber. Max's breath caught in his throat. Something was happening, something they couldn't stop. The walls of the chamber seemed to pulse, as if the earth itself was reacting to the opening of the chest, to the revelation of the truth. And then, just as quickly as it started, the tremor stopped. The room went deathly silent again, save for the sound of Max and Ethan's breathing. But now, the silence felt different, heavier. It was as though the world was waiting, watching, for them to make the next move. Max turned to Ethan, his mind racing. They had just uncovered the true nature of the debt, the blood that had been promised. And now, they had a choice to make. They could try to destroy the contract, to break the pact and risk everything, or they could find a way to fulfill it and live with the consequences. But either way, they were bound to the past, and the past was not something they could escape. We end this. We break the pact, Ethan. I don't care what it costs. You're sure? This isn't just about the house anymore. It's about the debt. And whatever we do, we can't just undo it. Max looked at the contract one last time, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He had already made up his mind. There was no going back. He wasn't going to let his family's mistakes control his future. This was his fight now. And whatever it took, he was going to destroy the pact and free them all from the curse that had haunted them for generations. With the contract in hand, Max stood up, his face set in determination. The darkness of the chamber seemed to close in on him, but he didn't flinch. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival. As they made their way back through the tunnel, Max felt the weight of the past pressing down on him, but there was a new resolve in his step. The next chapter of his family's story was about to be written, and he would be the one to write it. Max and Ethan emerged from the tunnel, the fresh air outside feeling like a sharp contrast to the suffocating darkness of the chamber they had just left behind. The weight of the contract, of the choices that had been made, still hung heavy between them. But there was a new resolve in Max's chest now, a clarity that had been missing before. As they stepped into the daylight, the farmhouse loomed before them, silent, watching. The house had been the center of it all, the origin of the debt, the family secrets, and the curse that had bound them. But Max knew now that it wasn't just the house they had to deal with. It was the legacy of his family, the bloodlines, the power that had manipulated everything. Max had come to this farmhouse with one goal: to escape, to leave behind the ruins of his past, to start fresh. But instead, he had been dragged into a world of ancient deals, hidden debts, and forces he couldn't even begin to comprehend. His family's mistakes had almost destroyed him. But now, it was time for him to make the choice. He could walk away, bury the past, and leave the farmhouse to the women. Or he could fight. He could tear down the walls that had kept him captive for so long, break the chains of his family's curse, and destroy the power that had been controlling their destiny for generations. Max's eyes flicked to Ethan, who had been silent for most of the journey back. Ethan knew what was at stake, but even he couldn't deny the risk. It was a gamble, but the stakes couldn't be higher. We end it. We break the pact. Ethan nodded, his expression a mix of determination and caution. He had always been the practical one, the one who kept their feet grounded in reality. But Max had shown him, time and time again, that sometimes it wasn't enough to play by the rules. Sometimes, you had to burn everything down to rebuild it. Then let's make it count. No turning back. The brothers turned and walked toward the farmhouse, their steps echoing on the gravel driveway. The silence between them was deafening, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence before a storm, the calm before the final battle. As they stepped inside, they found Veronica and Linda exactly where they had left them, standing by the fireplace, watching them with unreadable expressions. The tension in the room was thick, charged with an energy that had been building for days. The time for games was over. Max wasted no time. He stepped forward, holding the contract tightly in his hands. The weight of it was heavier than it had ever felt before, as if the very air around him was pushing back. But Max wasn't afraid anymore. He had nothing left to lose. This ends now. The debt. The pact. It's over. You've won your game, but it's finished. Veronica's smile didn't waver, but there was something different in her eyes. Linda remained as stoic as ever, her gaze piercing through Max like a blade. But neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Max threw the contract onto the floor between them. The words of the contract, the terms, the blood debt, everything that had bound his family to this nightmare, were now laid bare in front of the women. It wasn't just paper. It was a history, a curse, a promise that had been forced upon him. You want this power? You want my family's past? Take it, because I'm done. The room was still, silent. The only sound was the crackling of the fire, the flames dancing as if mocking the tension. And then, finally, Veronica stepped forward. She bent down slowly, her fingers brushing the contract, and for a moment, Max wondered if she would take it and claim victory once again. But instead, she stood up, her gaze meeting Max's with a calmness that unsettled him. You really don't understand, do you? No, I understand perfectly. This is over. Veronica's expression softened slightly, a faint trace of admiration crossing her face. She wasn't angry. She wasn't pleased. She was simply acknowledging something. It's never truly over, Max. Not until the last payment is made. Not until the final piece is in place. Max's heart raced as her words sank in. There was something final about them, a weight that left him breathless. But there was no time to second guess. He had to finish it. Now. Then I'll make sure it ends tonight. With that, Max turned to Ethan. His brother's eyes were filled with understanding. They didn't need words anymore. They knew what had to be done. Max stepped forward, pushing the contract aside, and walked toward the door. It was time to leave the past behind. For good. He could feel the weight of the house lifting off his shoulders, as if the very air was clearing, lightening. The farmhouse, the debt, everything that had haunted his family was now a thing of the past. He was walking away from it. No more promises. No more blood oaths. As Max and Ethan left the house for the last time, the sky overhead seemed to clear, the moon breaking free from the clouds and casting a pale, serene light over the land. The tension that had gripped him for so long slowly melted away, replaced with a sense of freedom that Max had never thought possible. He didn't know what the future held, or what would become of the farmhouse. But one thing was certain. He had broken the chains that had bound him to the past, and for the first time in his life, Max felt like he could finally breathe. As they walked down the gravel road, Max turned one last time to look at the farmhouse. The place that had once represented his escape, his fresh start, now felt like a distant memory. The ghosts of the past would always linger in the shadows, but they no longer had power over him. With Ethan by his side, Max knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The past was behind them, and the future was waiting. And for the first time in a long time, Max felt the freedom of a new beginning. The farmhouse stood silent in the distance, the sun setting behind it, casting long shadows across the land. But the future was no longer in its grip. Max and Ethan had taken back control. They had faced the past and survived.